Lori Wallach, could you tell us a little about what some of the concerns are about the TPP?
Well, the TPP includes the kind of language that was in NAFTA that makes it easier for big corporations to offshore more American jobs. They're literally incentives for job offshoring. The TPP also would push down our wages for the jobs that would be left because it would pit American workers more directly in competition with those in Vietnam who make less than 65 cents an hour. The TPP includes the new monopoly rights for big pharmaceutical companies that would raise medicine prices. In the developing country members of TPP, that could be a death sentence. For people in the U.S., it's going to mean higher prices. And there are even provisions that would allow the pharmaceutical firms to challenge decisions by Medicare and Medicaid vis-a-vis what kinds of medicines they'll reimburse. They try and focus on generics to keep the price down. The TPP would flood us with more imported unsafe food. For instance, it includes Malaysia and Vietnam. They send us a lot of shrimp and other seafood. Right now, a large percentage of it that is inspected gets rejected for a lot of different dangerous things. But under the TPP, those inspections could be challenged as an illegal trade barrier. Plus, the TPP would expand the outrageous investor state system. Those are those tribunals where a foreign corporation can sue the U.S. government going around our courts, going around our laws, and demand cash compensation from us taxpayers for any law they think violates their new TPP privileges and rights as a foreign investor. And then they get compensated for their lost future profits. Everyone saw the XL pipeline fight start. TransCanada's demanding $15 billion under NAFTA. That case is just the tip of the iceberg because the TPP would allow 9,500 more Japanese, Australian, and other companies to use that kind of regime against our domestic laws. So that's a snapshot of what it would mean if it went into effect. There's a lot more.
Well, in a written statement Wednesday, President Obama said the TPP, quote, includes the strongest labor standards and environmental commitments in history. And unlike in past agreements, these standards are fully enforceable. Lori Wallach, your response to that?
Well, first of all, with respect to the environmental standards, that's just objectively false. And it's really disappointing that the president would say that. For instance, Congress forced President Bush, the second one, to put into his trade agreements environmental chapters that were fully enforceable. So since Bush, that's been the standard, enforceable labor and environmental chapters with the same kind of enforcement as some of the commercial provisions in the agreement. But President Bush was forced to put into the agreement the enforcement of 7 different major multilateral environmental agreements. So those were the standards of the agreement. You had to adopt and enforce in your domestic law those 7 big environmental treaties. The TPP rolls that back. The other countries wouldn't have it. One of the 7 environmental agreements. So the entire standards enforced just went from this down to this one set of standards. And the other environmental rules that replace the enforceable treaties are things like, we shall strive to reduce death and destruction of marine mammals. The shall strive standard's not enforceable as compared to there used to be a treaty on marine mammals that was an enforceable we shall not kill dolphins standard. So just objectively, the environmental chapter is rolled back, and that's why a lot of the environmental groups that the administration had touted would support the TPP came out against it.
Lori Wallach,
NRDC, Defenders of Wildlife.
We have less than